Let's get started. So welcome to session 2 of the 20th annual Northwest Interlibrary Loan and Resource Sharing Conference. NWILL wishes to acknowledge that the territory called North America, now primarily occupied by descendants of European colonizers and other immigrants, is the rightful land of Indigenous, Native American, and First Nations populations. We are all responsible for understanding the history of colonization and genocide of Indigenous people, and must commit to learning, building relationships, sharing stories, and taking actions to support Indigenous sovereignty, priorities, and actions. We encourage you to learn about the Indigenous peoples to whom the land you occupy rightfully belongs. Please visit the documents section of the conference platform to learn more. So today's date is September 1st, 2021. This session is titled ReShare Beta Testing Document Deploying as an early implementation in a consortial setting, and it will be presented by Krista Higham and Scott Anderson. My name is Jason Cabaniss, and I'm the convener of this session. This session is being recorded with permission from the presenters. They retain the copyright to the information they are presenting and may request its removal from public viewing in the future by written request to the NWILL committee chairperson. However, at this time, it is planned that recordings will be available once captions have been added. Attendees will be notified when recordings are available. If you have a question during the session, please use the Q&A function in Zoom, and I will pose these to the presenter at the end of their presentation. The door prize keyword will be revealed between the presentation and Q&A. Please see the door prize link in the Event Mobi menu. When the Zoom webinar ends, please complete the post-session survey in Event Mobi. It is just one question and is in session feedback at the bottom of the sessions page. And so now I will turn it over to Krista and Scott.
Thank you. Welcome, everybody. And we will give a little background about ourselves. We are from Millersville University, which is in Pennsylvania.
There you go.
Thank you. So we're from Millersville University. I am the Access Services Librarian. Scott is our Information Systems Librarian. And Millersville University in Pennsylvania is a public institution, mid-sized master's level. We have a few doctorate programs, a little over 6,000 undergrad and grad FTE. So our library, we weeded heavily a number of years ago before our renovation, and we have about 280 physical volumes and many, many more e-book resources and other electronic resources. And in conjunction with this presentation, just so you know, we use ILLiad, we use Rapid ILL, and we are part of the Policy Consortium and their Easy Borrow program, which right now is returnables. We also use EBSCO's Discovery Service. So Project ReShare, I'm hoping that most of you have some idea, if my audio is a little better there. I'm hoping that some of you have an idea of what Project ReShare is. It is an open source approach to library resource sharing. At this point in time, it is returnables, but they are looking to expand to non-returnables as time goes on. The origin started in about August 2018, and PALC is the first consortia to go live in August of 2021. So it's a scalable service. It supports discovery, fulfillment, and delivery, but you can also integrate with your local discovery services and use ReShare primarily as a fulfillment network. And you can get some more information on projectreshare.org.
Okay, a little bit more about Krista and myself. We're both past members and or chairs of the PALC's Easy Borrow Advisory Council, which is the group of practitioners that primarily are responsible for providing guidance to the consortium writ large about resource sharing through the Easy Borrow service, whichever technical stack it happens to be. Krista was the chair and consultant for the implementation committee this time around, and is also a member of the documentation group. I've, like I said before, been a past chair of the Easy Advisory Council and was the lead for the previous migration we made from Dynex Circe to Relay International, which was the underlying software service back in 2007 and 8. I'm also PALCI's treasurer at the current time, and this is my 6th and final year as a member of the board at PALCI. So Krista and I both have a long history with PALCI, the consortium, and also the EasyBorrow service writ large through a number of activities that we've been engaged in over the last 10 years, if not more. PALCI University, or Millersville University, is a Project Share founding member, which is the second group of early adopting members. Charter members were the original group, founding members were the second group. There's about 21 members between the charter and founding members at this particular point. Other institutions have joined subsequent to those. You're certainly, if you're at all interested in Project ReShare, you as an institution or another consortium are certainly eligible to join Project ReShare and support the efforts that are underway. Millersville has also been an Atlas Systems development partner for many years. So we have been, and actually just had some activity today on testing the ILLiad server-side add-on that will integrate and interact with ReShare. So basically you can automatically be funneling requests that happen to come in through ILLiad right into ReShare through either decision support or routing rules as you see fit. And just so everybody's on the same page, if I say EasyB, that's really what it's been. We've had a lot of conversation about how to include or not include the dash. It originally was E-ZBorrow. It became EasyBorrow without the dash, and then just to make it even more brief, we came up with EasyB. So that is in fact the generally branded amongst the 70 members of the PALCI Consortium service for the unmediated ILL service that we've had since about the late 90s. So a little bit of talk about alpha participation versus beta testing. In the grand scheme of things, Millersville ended up doing more of what we have referred to here as alpha participation versus actual beta testing, though we did do some beta testing. It turns out we ended up doing more on the alpha side. Late into 2019 to late 2020, and we did a lot of help with proof of concept type work and setup work in generally speaking to, we would like it to do this, this is what the workflow should be. Spent a lot of time on what data to capture because we weren't really sure at the beginning of what kind of information would you need to set up an NSIP service for an ALMA institution versus an NSIP service for another kind of ILS or LMS. So we spent a lot of time with, the kind of things, the kind of questions that you're asking that you as a participant would fill out in a spreadsheet in the most part. So that really wasn't entirely clear. So we worked through all of that, helped come up with here's the 20 questions we need to answer, here's the pieces of information we need, and flesh that out with index data in this particular case and our own PALCI staff on if we do this, we get it to work. We forgot to ask this question as we were trying to configure this, go back, add it to the list of things to ask other follow-on institutions, generally going through that proof of concept for the first time. And then we also did some preliminary work with getting single sign-on working, either directly or through a federation, testing of basic message pairs, and does it work? Okay, great, we asked the right question. Or, well, we tested something and now it's asking this. We didn't even know it was going to ask that, so we need to put that on the sheet, that kind of stuff. So subsequent institutions weren't churning through that kind of effort. Beta testing for the service was March through May, June maybe of this particular year. We did a little bit less of this, a lot less of this actually. Timing didn't particularly work very well, but there were some other institutions that were also participating. And those were basically beta testing of actual transactions, fake transactions as it were, notices, all of the workflow kinds of resources and activities that would normally happen to see if statuses changed properly, if notices went out, that kind of stuff. So generally speaking, we did more in the sense of early participation more than actual testing as things turned out. lots of demo and workflow feedback to index data, a lot of helping with data capture to figure out what was needed to actually implement the service, which we'll perhaps talk a little bit later about documentation. There's always these flavors of documentation, what the vendor provides, what this consortium will provide, what you as an ILS type of X would need. So there's some flavors there, but all that information that sort of goes into that spreadsheet that allows somebody to make a configuration. And again, we've done some harvesting trials. Millersville was pretty early in the here, take our records. Can we get records back from the ReShare shared index? And the answer is yes. We can't do it right now because we're now scaling up, but we did go through all that proof of concept and figured out at least what worked and what didn't work, and how to harvest, and sort of really understood, okay, yay, we got it to work. Then we're going to start asking questions about what do we think people will actually ask for, and what sets might need to be published, and how we would want to delineate that. And do we want to let everybody get their own set, or do we want to publish a set? All those kinds of questions. So that's a little bit more on the participation and dealing with things that we might want to consider versus actually the workflow testing. Krista, you're back over here with communication.
So communication with the consortia. There are several employees with PALSI, and there was a project manager and also sort of a member liaison. And the two of them, along with myself and a few others, were kind of in an initial group to develop the communication. What ways do we want to put out information? The move from the Relay software to ReShare was talked about for probably 2 years. Just, there's going to be some sort of move, but many unknowns. And so we started this past spring. I think we had one webinar last fall, and then this past spring did several webinars, just preparing members for the new system, doing demos. The software is mostly being created by Index Data, and they provided a number of their staff for availability and answer questions and to do demos. We had sort of a testers group, which was about 5 different schools, probably about 12 people. And we communicated weekly for a while we were going through beta testing and as things were moving along. But communication out to the full consortia was mostly in webinars in the beginning. And then this summer, when we were actually ramping up to go live, we needed, more communication about, what kind of bugs are there, what's happening, what's not happening. And PALSI staff had created a number of different avenues. There was talk of a Slack channel. There was a couple new listservs created. And in the end, the existing listserv that we had always used to communicate with one another among the practitioners in particular was the one that ended up being used the most. So just a few tidbits. Don't necessarily try something new, even though you'd like to perhaps, for this particular project, use a new listserv or use Slack or use some other type of communication method. We found that it just ended up working best with the existing listserv that was already there. Everybody knew about it, had it in their computers, and it was easy to use. Next. So also during the spring, another group of us, about 5 members, created a documentation committee, and it was led by one of the PALSI staff. And so earlier, the beta documentation had already been collected, as Scott mentioned. What do we need to collect for configuration? That had been hammered out the previous fall. But actual use documentation, there was some from ReShare, but it wasn't really in a workflow kind of guide. It was, this is how you do this. This is how you do that, but not necessarily do this first and then do this second, third, fourth. So we did work on creating some guides, some workflow guides. They were very somewhat elementary. The system, because, you know, this is a brand new system, we're the first consortia to use it. Things were still ongoing. New features were being added, bug fixes were happening, and so those workflow guides ended up being a little on the generic side, not a ton of, you know, click here, click there, a few screenshots, but then screens changed. So that will be an ongoing project to have those sort of workflow guides. Basic documentation is there, kind of backing up some of our implementation documentation. Knowing what systems members are using, we had probably 7 different ILSs, with the majority being on Alma, but the way each of those systems were used was slightly different. Some use the resource sharing library, some do not. Some various ILSs work better with NCIP than others. And so there was a lot of variation in how to implement everything. And we also already had some policy-specific documentation, including our policies, how long we loan for, what to do with a lost book, and so forth. So just some kind of, you know, cheat sheets of our use documentation is what we ended up doing, but that I think will continue to be an ongoing process. Next.
ReShare deployment. There are a couple options that are envisioned for how you can make whatever you have harvested into a ReShare shared index accessible to your communities. And basically there's 2. There's the native ReShare user interface, which is powered by Viewfind. And basically it's a ReShare as discovery and fulfillment. Now it's not discovery in the sense of I think more of discovery as being all those articles, all the books, all the media, all the open, you know, whatever it is that you have included in your discovery layer of choice, be it from OCLC or EBSCO or Ex Libris as discovery. Native ReShare discovery is just whatever's in the shared index, which is mostly coming from library catalogs. So there's a significant chunk of content that would be accessible to your community that will be not represented there. The other option, and the one that Millersville is working for, is to integrate whatever records we harvest out of our ReShare index and integrate those into our local discovery layer. Millersville is an EDS instance. And then the ReShare and the consortial holdings will simply be part and parcel of our existing, very familiar, highly used discovery layer. And users don't necessarily need to know that they're using ReShare in the background. They don't have to go to some other place to log in and check for anything. And all of the business logic about how to requests get routed and all that kind of good stuff just sort of fades into the background. The caveat here is that harvesting is not yet available. We will eventually, once all 70 institutions are loaded in there, probably wind up with more than 40 million unique records. So we'll have a significant corpus of unique content, and that's a ballpark guess. It's probably on the low side, but we'll have a lot of unique records that will then surface in our discovery layer. And then, you know, users or faculty members will simply say, yeah, I would like that. They'll click a button, they'll get a request, it'll go off into the ether, and it will get routed however it needs to be routed. And they'll get an email back that says, great, go here, pick things up. So they won't necessarily have to go to another service to request items that we don't have, much like most institutions have that deployed now, because we didn't have a way to harvest out the consortial holdings. So in the standalone model, basically, you're going to have the native service, you know, ReShare in the raw, so to speak. And it's what, historically speaking, most institutions have done. It's based on viewfind, and that's what they're going to interact with. For you, users will interact with a viewfind instance, however configured you want to make it. It is, however, a separate trip to another place, another service, like another database that, you've got to know it's a returnables request. Basically, we've occasionally had students that are going there trying to find articles, and it's like, well, sorry, this is only returnables. And again, because the delineation between articles and books isn't necessarily always clear in a user's mind. They're looking for any information on something. And historically, library holdings have been more of the physical kinds of things when we're talking about resource sharing. And then the other option is a slice of the local discovery, which is basically taking the library holdings, getting them into the local discovery, and then simply using ReShare as fulfillment. So it becomes entirely a back office kind of service that users don't necessarily need to know any mechanics about. And I don't know that we wouldn't not make it available over the immediate term, particularly when SSO and harvesting aren't available. But the plan here at Millersville is very much to take the entire quote unquote union catalog of PALC and put it into our local discovery layer. And that's it. There would be no more quote unquote easy borrow, so to speak, because you would just be using it as part and parcel of something that we use for lots of other things. Integrated with local discovery. Again, this is what we're after. SSO is the end state. About 15 of the institutions, of the 70 institutions, are already SSO in place. That being said, authentication, once it's working, it becomes a non-issue. So we're able to push requests from discovery layer into other services, knowing whose it is and where it's going to go and all that kind of good stuff. So we don't have to re-authenticate users ever. ReShare results then are obviously placed in the broader context of however you have tuned your local discovery, using whatever search algorithms or rankings that you might have used, or business logic that you might have in place for how you handle when links appear or do not appear based on some sort of filtering logic that you may or may not want to include. So we're also thinking about slicing books into a discovery database of just books, but that's where we would put all our physical books, our ebooks, purchasable ebooks, things that we would buy. So again, we've taken the PALC catalog and sort of turned it into a thing that we can use in several other venues without having to just go to EasyBorrow all the time. And again, the last few lines there, holdings then are injected into several other places. We have all of the flavors of discovery out there, and we generally have somebody who's carrying the torch for each kind of implementation. So most of the people that are paying attention inside of PALC know that, I'm sort of been doing work with EBSCO to get these records harvested, and I've got a number of people lined up. And once we can start harvesting records, we will start doing that, build a, for now, simple standard catalog of PALC holdings, and then that's what everybody will roll out to. And then over time, we'll sort of tune that a little bit and maybe slice it apart. Here's monographs, here's video materials that people are willing to lend. So again, we get a little bit more granular, but out of the box, the consortium is trying to do, here's one set of records that represent all of the consortium's holdings of X type. Do with it as you need to in your own discovery layer to the best benefit of your constituent groups. Again, no separate UI, no separate trip to someplace else to place requests. And if you find an item, you just place a request for it, however your institution does that. And from the user's perspective, you're done. Our current deployment at Millersville, we went live with the rest of the consortium. PALC deployed on August 12th, which I think was a Friday. We delayed a few days for a number of internal reasons, but we went live on August 16th. So users are actually visiting the standalone version here at Millersville and placing requests through EasyBorrow as they have traditionally done. And that's not necessarily what we want it to be, but that's what it does right at the moment. We did not launch with SSO in place. So it is the last service that Millersville has that does not use a single sign-on. We're still using things that are tied to our RLS. And that was sort of a bummer, since we were the proof of concept institution for making SSO works. So I know it works because it did work. We're just queued up in amongst some other institutions at this particular point. for a number of technical reasons on the development side. It turned out to be a lot more intensive than anticipated because we're not just doing yes/no authentication. You need yes/no authentication, and then you have to expose a certain level of actual attribute type data about users that allows you to be able to determine this request is being placed by this particular user and send enough information along that it can match into the ILS and that ReShare itself can keep track of it. So you sort of run into institutions that either don't have those attributes in their Active Directory for the most part, and or they have some political decisions about you really have to pass through a lot of tests to be releasing attributes to other institutions. So, there's some technical issues there, but there's also some political issues involved because you're actually sending information along, not just saying, yes, this person's associated with us, end of story. We have to now send who they are and any other attributes that we might need to be able to handle that request.
And so a little bit about our back office deployment with my ILL staff. We're handling requests, and it doesn't, matter if the requests start natively in ReShare, which is Viewfind at the moment, or if the requests come in through our ILL management software, which for us is ILLiad. The staff will handle that. And we do have a little bit to work out because some things have been done traditionally by students. And if we use ILLiad for all our requests, we'll have to train students more on ILLiad. 1 or 2 students know it, but not the majority of our students. So right now there is the split. We do have items requests coming in via ReShare directly, and our regular, interlibrary loan requests come in through ILLiad, and then we are working on sending those over to ReShare. So we do have an add-on right now running in ILLiad that will send them to ReShare. It does some basic things, and we'll talk about that in just a moment. But we're hoping that down the road, once we're able to get the records into our discovery service, that we only have a single mechanism, that the ILL management software, ILLiad, is the way that all book requests, all non-returnables, or all returnables come in and be processed. And then we can send them to ReShare to be filled. If they're not able to be reshared, or through ReShare, then they will go to RapidR, and then we can go to OCLC last. So we're able to sort of queue up and go through our various types of fulfillment mechanisms that we have. And if everything comes in through one mechanism, through ILLiad, analytics will be a lot easier. It's all in one place, and we won't have to get statistics from multiple locations. Next. Next slide, Scott.
Yep, you're there.
Sorry, slight delay on my end. So we've been doing some testing with Atlas on a ILLiad server-side add-on, and we've had some good luck. A few other schools have been testing it as well and have had a mixed bag of reviews. Accidentally, it spawned 50 requests of the same title when Penn did their testing. So we luckily did not have that happen. But basically, if a request for a I see Lapis is on this particular webinar, and he has put the title out there. And so as requests come in to ILLiad, that they will first then, the server-side add-on will automatically grab them, bounce them off ReShare, database and see if they can be filled. If they can, they go through the ReShare process of fulfillment and that particular software. If not being able to be filled through ReShare, then we hope they will then bounce to Rapid. And as I said earlier, then OCLC as our last. We also, along the way, there are several checks to see if we own the particular item so that we can just fill it in-house. There's also mechanisms in the ILLiad server-side add-on for unfillable requests, and then move on to the next one, and avoiding the no-fill burden on the user to resubmit. If they place it into one system, it automatically goes through all these systems, and they don't have to fill out the form again, and so forth. So right now, if it's created in ReShare, we cannot move it into ILLiad if it doesn't fill within ReShare, but that hopefully is down the line. Go ahead.
So Millersville's ideal deployment for ReShare in our sort of informational ecosystem is integrated with local discovery, and I suspect that will happen later this semester. All of our requests for items that we don't have will flow through our ILL management software. In this particular case, is ILLiad, which basically allows us to ask the user to submit that request only once, just what Krista was talking about. So again, how we get it filled inside of the options we have available to us is entirely unknown to the user, and they don't really need to know about all of that. And then lastly, all of this is SSO enabled. Like I said before, ReShare is our last service without SSO in place, but that's where we're hoping to be able to get SSO once on upfront, and then all of the information we need will land into ILLiad with all of the abilities to send all of that into other services, and everything is already all set up, and we know whose request it is. And we knew who the user was at the beginning. We don't need to keep asking them for that kind of information. So the idea is to make it binary from the user's perspective, in the sense that you've got it available to you right there in front of you online, great, use it. If it's not available to you online right there in front of you and you want it, you only have to know how to do one thing, and then we will take it from there, and that's the end of that. So we're trying to make it very binary for the users.
So yeah, so throughout this, there were lots of lessons learned, Palsy-wise, Millersville-wise, and so forth. Right now, we have tried, Palsy has 70 schools, 56 were initially going to ReShare, and we all went on the same day. Perhaps a tiered deployment, especially by ILS configuration, may have been a better way to do that. Hard to say, but there's just so many different permutations with configurations. Even within the same ILS, there can be multiple. SSO details, what is passed between systems and what needs to be passed. That was not overly well thought out in the beginning. Yes, most SSO systems easily say, yes, you're approved, no, you're not approved. But do we need to pass the barcode? What do you use to circulate? Is that a user ID? Is that some sort of number that is generated by the university? What are those details? And do you have that available to you to be passed through an SSO type of system? Documentation, as I said, we really tried to do guides either for varying users or kind of a workflow use cases, but the various pieces of the system continued to change and were worked on. We had a number of bug fixes at the last minute, actually in the last week or so. Since we've been live, we've had a number of fixes. So some of that documentation will change, and it was difficult to have that all prepared ahead of time. And just timeline, scope creep. We really had hoped to be live well before, 2 weeks before the semester started for most of us. And the timeline just kept kind of pushing out and pushing out. So having some realistic timelines, having enough staff, enough development time, enough time in your consortia to put all the details together. Some of this was definitely some things to look at when you're doing a large project. And that is everything. Are there any questions out there?
So thanks, Krista and Scott. That was great. Before we jump into the Q&A, I just real quick want to share my screen. I'm going to show, oh, it looks like someone else is sharing. Just real quick, do the, here's the answer to our door prize thing that we're doing as part of this one. If you're taking part in this, here's the answer or thing that you have to put down. We'll just keep it up for a few more seconds. And yeah, there we go. So let's jump into the Q&A. I can see we have, someone asks, what is the advantage of using ReShare over WorldShare, or do you use both?
We technically use both. WorldShare is when I mention OCLC as being our third tier, as a way of filling requests. That would be essentially WorldShare. We use ILLiad on top of that. But as ReShare develops and especially starts moving into non-returnables, articles, and so forth, it's quite possible that down the road we will not need WorldShare as an option.
Historically speaking, one of the other issues that has arisen is much like Rapid, where you try to fill things within 24 hours, the consortium members that participate in the consortium also will expedite requests from schools within that particular environment. So when we start our workday, ReShare requests are always the first thing gets processed. Everything else falls later in the queue. And that's the standard practice amongst, or almost the standard practice amongst most of the members inside the consortium. So the other option here is historically speaking, and we might have to revisit this here at Millersville as well. If you're doing native processing through ReShare, that can be much more student powered than staff powered. And historically speaking, that's been a big attraction because you could get a lot of requests through with far less staff involvement than you could with something like an ILLiad. Now, obviously, we'll try to be applying a lot of logic to ILLiad to dampen the amount of human mediation on requests. But again, the idea is to make this as efficient as possible. And one of the ways we can make it more efficient is to have more students involved in that process versus staff, because we know at this point we're not going to get any more staff, and there always happen to be some students around most semesters.
Yes, definitely. And we may have some of our staff retiring in the next few years. So we're definitely looking at ways to be as efficient as possible. Any other questions?
And I'm keeping an eye on the Q&A box. Manisha, who's a committee member with NWILL, asks, is ReShare used by tribal libraries?
I would say at this point, not right now, just because PALC is the only consortia using it at this time. But there is definite plans for other consortias to join and potential down the road for single libraries as well.
Yeah, I think there's a consortium in New York that's going live in a few more weeks. Again, middle of the semester, part of that timeline issue that we talked about earlier, but there's no reason that they couldn't. It simply is a function of getting yourselves and whomever it is that you play with in the sense of lending and borrowing plugged in and ready to go, and you'll have services and functionalities that you might already have. And in our case, inside of PALC, we're going to wind up with a host of additional functionalities by using ReShare that we have not been able to necessarily do in the past, such as collection development, collection analysis, and expedited handling of non-returnables. So we have some things down the road that we're looking at, which sort of goes back to the first question about WorldShare versus ReShare. Most of us, when we were looking at our own catalogs and how well they're represented in WorldShare, the percentage of accuracy has declined precipitously over the last decade or so. So, WorldShare is going to be far less accurate for the kinds of analysis that we as a consortium were looking to do. So it's partially in the sharing end of things, but it's also partially in the ability to do legitimate, accurate analysis of various kinds of things, because it's coming out of catalogs in near real time, which is something that has apparently slid off the radar for updating WorldShare for many of our libraries. So ReShare will represent a much more accurate corpus of holdings from the consortium than WorldShare would. So we get all the benefits of expedited sharing amongst ourselves with some significant improvements in collection analysis.
So there's a follow-up to that question, or the initial question from Manisha, which is, how do you plan to engage the students to work or help with ReShare, and what tasks do you have for them?
I'm going to assume student employees in that question. And yes, if right now, the native interface of ReShare is requests are handled almost exclusively by students. They print out the requests, they gather the books, they ship them out, they receive the shipments that come in and enter them into the system, take them up to the circulation desk for hold shelf. As returns come in, they process them and ship them back to the library that we borrowed it from. So that process is almost exclusively done by students. And most of some of that process, the shipping and so forth using the UPS software, will continue to be done by students. We may also allow some of our higher trained students to use ILLiad and to do some basic processing in there. But as Scott had said, we're trying to set up as much automation as possible that requests will just flow through our various systems that we have available to us for fulfillment.
Great, thanks for answering that. And so we've got about 2 minutes left. I think if we have a really short question that anyone might have, I'll keep an eye on the Q&A box. But yeah, I just want to say thank you, Krista and Scott, for this presentation. And we will be archiving these on the conference site. So that'll be for those who aren't able to attend.
And if anybody has questions, feel free to contact us after this session, and we will answer them to the best of our ability.